Welcome, everybody, to day 2 of our second biannual Blueprint Leadership Summit, a meeting of the top leadership minds and luminaries in the business space, brought to you by Conant Leadership. We're so happy to have you all with us. Today's topic is an extremely timely and relevant one in a world where a huge segment of the workforce has more autonomy than ever over how they structure their days. The topic is When, the Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing, featuring esteemed guest keynote panelist Dan Pink, who our host Doug Conant will formally introduce in just a few minutes. But before we jump in, I'll tell you a little bit about the Blueprint and about Conant Leadership, introduce the overarching theme for the week, cover some housekeeping items for today's Zoom webinar, introduce our founder, Doug Conant, and then we'll be on our way. If you joined us yesterday, the following spiel is going to be extremely familiar, so please bear with me for just a few minutes. First, I'm Amy Fetterman, Conant Leadership's editor-in-chief and director of content, and co-author with Doug Conant of the Wall Street Journal bestseller, The Blueprint, 6 Practical Steps to Lift Your Leadership to New Heights. And I'll be helping to moderate the Q&A portion of today's program. If this is your first time engaging with Conant Leadership, welcome. Let me tell you about our commitment to leaders. Conant Leadership's mission is championing leadership that works in the 21st century. Our mission is about making meaning, not money. Our founder, Doug Conant, takes no salary, and all profits after covering our operating costs are donated to enlightened organizations whose leadership is really moving the world forward. We offer free resources like this summit as part of our larger high-impact suite of leadership resources and training. This Leadership Summit is a free week-long special event inspired by the leadership wisdom contained in the Blueprint. This summit is designed to empower leaders to meet the urgent leadership challenges of the 21st century in a way that is effective, authentic, and fulfilling. And this summit is a celebratory close to the relaunch of our book, The Blueprint, as it was published in March 2020, right into the teeth of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we had to cancel almost all of our initial launch events. So our first Blueprint Summit was held in March 2021 on the 1-year anniversary of the book's publication. And this fall summit will bring that relaunch to a close. The theme of this week is navigating the new normal, which will be anything but normal. The complex world around us will continue to churn, bringing untold challenges to our collective doorsteps, and there's really no stopping it. The reality is, often as leaders, you can't control the what happens in the world around you, but you can control the how you respond, how you engage with your constituents, and how you can bring more enlightened thinking to your leadership behaviors. Each speaker this week will offer a unique perspective on improving your how for all leaders from every background and with every experience level. The goal of this week's summit is to help you navigate ongoing turbulence with a greater sense of empathy, authenticity, and impact. Fittingly, we wrote the Blueprint with turbulence in mind. It contains a practical 6-step process for building a strong enough leadership foundation to withstand the inevitable winds of change. It's meant to keep you grounded, no matter what swirls around you or what crisis upends your life, your organization, or your team. Central to the Blueprint is this idea that the only way out is in. When you feel stuck or trapped by circumstances, it helps to do the reflection and inner work to determine what kind of leader you are and how you want to show up for the people who are relying on you. Inspired by architecture and design thinking, the Blueprint honors the fundamental engineering principles that help our greatest structures withstand mighty storms. Any good structural engineer will tell you that the trick to building a soaring skyscraper is laying a deep foundation. Without a sturdy foundation, buildings can topple under their own weight and may not be able to withstand natural disasters or high winds. The same thing is true in leadership. Doug's firsthand experience leading thousands of people has shown him that to lead through crisis, leaders need this sturdy and secure foundation that tethers them to every facet of their unique personality and skill set and keeps them grounded in their purpose and beliefs. Overall, the idea is that you don't have to learn to lead like somebody else. You need a proven process that helps you lead like only you can. And the incremental 6-step process and reflection exercises in the Blueprint enable you to do that little by little without chasing perfection in a way that nests into the crushing pace, stressors, and responsibilities of modern life. The incredible leaders and luminaries who we are honored to have joining us this week as keynote panelists all found a way to make an impact on the world in a way that was true to who they are, that was anchored in a deep foundation, and that was connected to a higher purpose, while also being highly effective in a turbulent environment in their respective fields. And we really have a lot to learn from them. Let's watch a short video that tells the Blueprint story before we jump into today's session.
I was 32 years old. My wife and I had just had our second son. I was on my way into work one day. The receptionist intercepted me at the door and said, the senior vice president would like to see you in his office. He invited me to sit down and he said, Doug, your job has been eliminated. Clean out your office and be out of here by noon. My life changed in a snap. I was devastated, totally caught off guard. My mind was racing. What am I going to do? Just had another baby and a very large mortgage. I'm showing up for work early every day and one of the last people to leave at night, and I'm working on weekends. But I found out maybe I didn't do anything wrong, but I didn't do enough right. An important part of the concept of the blueprint is that you need to have a strong foundation that will allow you to deal with the winds of change in your life. Because we do powerfully believe the only way out of this is by going in. We're not teaching you some new technique for being more influential with others. We're helping you get more in touch with who you really are and how you want to show up in a way that speaks to you. That's the beauty of the blueprint process. All the leadership gurus that are out there, they have good points and they have good ideas, but they have not walked 1,000 miles in your shoes. I have.
That video sets the stage nicely for the week. In particular, the fact that growth can come from adversity. We'll all be honing our resilience skills for the foreseeable future as we continue to navigate this highly abnormal new normal. Now, some quick housekeeping about the Q&A portion of today's program. If you think of a question you'd like to ask our panelists at any time during the town hall, simply type it into the Q&A box in the bottom center of your Zoom screen. When we get to the Q&A portion of the program, I will ask our panelists your submitted questions, and we'll try to get to as many as possible in the time allotted. If you're using the chat feature, I won't be able to moderate comments and questions submitted there, but my colleague, Conant Leadership Chief of Staff, Mara Katsikis, will be monitoring that chat function if you have any logistical or technical questions about the Zoom webinar itself. But again, to ask our panelists questions, the Q&A box is the right place to do that. Finally, I will introduce our host today, Conant Leadership founder and CEO, Doug Conant, and he will personally introduce our special guest, Dan Pink, to you shortly. Doug Conant is the only former Fortune 500 CEO who is a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling author, a top 50 leadership innovator, a top 100 leadership speaker, and a top 100 most influential author in the world. He has served as president of Nabisco Foods, president and CEO of Campbell Soup Company, and chairman of Avon Products. He is also chairman of CECP, that's Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose, and chairman of the Center for Higher Ambition Leadership, and proudly serves on the boards of the National Organization on Disability, the Partnership for Public Service, and Hope College. With all of those announcements behind us, I will turn it over to you, Doug.
Thank you, Amy. Wow, what a day we have in front of us. This is very exciting. I have the opportunity to introduce Dan Pink. And Dan is a graduate of my alma mater. Sadly, I'm much older than he is, but he was a graduate of my alma mater at Northwestern University, Phi Beta Kappa, I believe, Dan. My roommate was Phi Beta Kappa. That's about as close as I could get to it. And he was also, I think you were the Truman Scholar. He went on to get his JD at Yale, went into the political world, ultimately became the chief speechwriter for Al Gore. And then he went into his own world of celebrating learning that can help human performance. And he's the best-selling author of, I guess he's written 7 books now, which we'll be talking about. I first encountered, and by the way, Dan, the Thinkers 50, which is a highly regarded group on management thinking, has listed Dan as, I believe, the 6th most influential thinker in management, regarding management. And I subscribe to that. He's definitely a leading thinker, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. Dan has written a new book, When: The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. And Lord knows we can all have better timing, can't we? I first encountered Dan in 2009. He'd written his book, Drive. And I was in my 9th year as CEO of Campbell Soup Company. And I was looking for someone who could challenge my global leadership team, the top 350 leaders, to start thinking in a more enlightened way around how they were leading their people. And he had just published Drive. We invited him to come speak to our Global 350. And the fundamental concept in Drive is that the carrot and the stick motivations just don't work anymore. And that was in 2009. And by the way, they work less in 2021. The key thing I found as part of that work that he did, which has inspired my work, he said that science shows us the way, and that there are three key things that we had to focus on: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, we had to own our own journeys. Mastery, we had to have the urge to get better every day. And purpose, we had to be searching for meaning in our work. Basically, we're all spending more of our lives thinking about or doing our work than anything else. And in order to have a fulfilling journey, it has to have meaning to us. So this notion of autonomy, mastery, and drive and purpose is embedded in the blueprint work we've done. We believe that you need to own your own journey, and we will help you find that way. We believe you need to bring a mastery model to the work, that you apprentice at this work and you commit to trying to do a little better every day. And we also believe that it needs to be a purpose-driven exercise. By the way, the purpose may change, but you should always be challenging yourself to find a higher calling in your work. And you can do it, and you can deliver in the here and now. So that's my little spiel about his work. What I'd like to do now is introduce Dan to you, and we'll talk a little bit about the science. We'll talk about when. And Dan, are you there? What did I miss?
I am here, Doug.
Did I miss anything?
What'd you miss? I think you left out the Nobel Prize, my Tony, and the Heisman Trophy.
And he's a proud Washingtonian. That went.
Yes.
And you're not still rooting for the Nationals, are you? Have you let it go for the year?
Well, I mean, they were mathematically eliminated from the playoffs 2 weeks ago. So, as a fairly rational dude, I have let go of my hopes for this season.
Well,
we do have arguably the best player in baseball, Juan Soto, playing for us. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. He's the dark horse for the MVP. By the way, I'm a Chicago Cubs fan, so I've been devastated this year.
Yeah, it's been a bad season for the Cubs. It's especially given the run that the Cardinals are on right now.
It's painful. That may be of interest to you and I, but
probably nobody else. But if we ever want to start a sports talk show, we know
where to go
right here.
We know where to go. Listen, you and I have talked about. I have three questions that I'd like to roll around with you.
Okay.
And for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, then we're going to open up the phone lines. By then, we should have stirred up the pot, and we'll take questions from the audience. The first question is that in the new world of hybrid and remote work, people have much greater say over how they manage their workday.
Yeah.
What does the science tell us about how to do that effectively?
Yeah, and that's a huge question. And so I think one kind of reality check here is that not everybody has that kind of control. Not everybody is able to work at home. You have actually, I think it's less than half of the U.S. workforce is actually has the kind of job that allows them to work at home. And so these principles of autonomy that you mentioned earlier, we need to make sure that the notions of autonomy and self-direction apply to everybody in the workplace, not just people like me I've been working at home for 20 years. I've been social distancing for 50. So this is not a major transition for me, but so that's one reality check. Now let's talk about that and forgive this is going to end up being a somewhat long-winded answer, but let me explain it. So here's what we know. And you mentioned it and you teed it up well here. So there's research on this question. There is research on this question of timing. We make all kinds of when decisions in our life. And for years, I myself made them in a very sloppy way. And that's the wrong way to do it because there's a rich body of evidence, a rich body of science. It's complicated because it's spread over many disciplines that gives us the guidance to make better, smarter, more strategic decisions about when to do things. And that is true at the unit of a day, which is in some ways the most important unit in time. So here's what we know. Okay, so we're going to go down one more level here. Here's what we know. This is the most important thing. Our brain power doesn't remain constant over the course of the day. This is really important. Our brain power changes over the course of the day. Now, unfortunately, the way we schedule things, whether we're scheduling it remotely or in our own work, we kind of assume that our brain power stays level and constant the entire day. That's not true. There are big differences between the daily high point and the daily low point. And what the best time to do something depends on what you're doing. All right. Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about some design principles here. Here's what we know. About 80% of us move through the day in 3 stages. Peak in the morning, early in the day, trough later in the day, in the middle of the day, recovery toward the end of the day. Peak, trough, recovery. Now, about 20% of us are more complicated. These are people who have what's called an evening chronotype. Chronotype is just your propensity. Do you wake up early and go to sleep early? Do you wake up late and go to sleep late? About 20% of us have an evening chronotype. Those folks are more complicated than the rest of us, but they hit their peak much later in the day. Late afternoon, evening, well into the evening. These are the people who hit their stride at 11:30 p.m. when I'm passed out in my bed. Now, here we go. Here's what the research tells us very clearly. During the peak, which again, for most of us is early in the day, that's when we're most vigilant. So we should be doing what's called what we think of as analytic work. Analytic work is simply work that requires heads down focus and attention. During the peak, we're vigilant, we're able to bat away distractions. We're best off doing the kind of work, writing a report, analyzing data, carefully going over the steps of a strategy that benefits from that heads down focus and lack of distraction. So 80% of us should be doing that early. 20% of us, we should be doing it late at night. During the trough, early to mid-afternoon. That's a terrible time of day. You have huge decrements in performance across a whole array of things, to the point where I think you actually have to explicitly design around that. And so instead of doing your analytic work during that trough period, where possible, we should be either designing around it or doing our administrative work, answering our routine email and so forth. Now, during the recovery period, which for most of us is late in the afternoon and early in the evening, our mood is up, but our vigilance is down. That it makes it the best time for what social psychologists call solving insight problems. Insight problems are problems with non-obvious solutions where you don't know what the problem is, you're iterating ideas, you're brainstorming or whatever. And so here you go. We have a set of design principles. We should be doing our analytic work during the peak, which for most of us is early. For all you night owls out there, it's late at night. We should be doing our administrative work during the trough, and we should be doing our insight work during the recovery. And when we can reconfigure our schedules to be a little bit more aligned with that, people do better and feel better.
It's that easy. My gosh, it's taken us a few millennia to get there, but
well, you know what? Actually, it's interesting you say that, because in many ways, we haven't listened to our bodies and our brains enough. That in other portions of human existence and civilization, we actually abided by some of the ways that our bodies and brains change over the course of a day. Right now, what we have, especially in the US, is we have this notion that all times of days are created equal, and the best way to perform at a higher level in all cases is to grind it out. And that's true sometimes, but it's not true all the time. And this idea of like always powering through, never taking a break, this very Puritan notion, it might feel morally virtuous, but the evidence is pretty overwhelming that it's not that smart.
Yeah, well, and this is why I love Dan Pink. He's probably the most curious and open-minded of the leadership thinkers that I follow. He may have had a hypothesis at one point in his career where this Puritan work ethic, or growing up in the Midwest, it's a rural reap what you sow ethic, up at the sunrise, down at the sunset, plow through your day mindset. That's what I grew up with. And you may have grown up with a similar ethic, but somewhere along the way you said, wait a minute, let's think about this and let's study it and let's learn from it and let's think about changing our behavior. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think that one of the things that I find compelling, and I thank you for mentioning it, Doug, is that, there is evidence out there about how to do things better. Now, it isn't always airtight and it isn't always unequivocal, but there is evidence out there about how to do things better. And so when you think about, so this is why I think even a blueprint is a lovely metaphor for leadership, because I think that a lot of leaders don't have blueprints. They have intuitions, they have guesses, they don't have anything systematic. And so, I wouldn't want to take my kids to my kids to go to a doctor who wasn't making evidence-based decisions. I wouldn't want to invest my money based on intuitions. I wouldn't want to have surgery based on the surgeon's intuition. And I don't think that we should have leaders who aren't operating from a blueprint of evidence. Yeah, right. And the evidence is there. And so to me, the combination of following the evidence and doing a little bit of experimentation is really the key. And I think what it comes to, and I think, Doug, this is one reason why you flourished as a leader. It requires a degree of intellectual humility. The intellectual humility to say, you know what? I don't know the answer. Let's find out. It requires the intellectual humility to say, what I thought was the answer is not the answer. So I'm going to change my mind. Rather than like let my ego get in the way and say, I can't admit that I'm changing my mind because that's a sign of weakness. So I really do think I mean, some of the stuff that you and Amy have worked on and just the general approach is very much in this line. Let's be humble. Let's listen to the evidence. Let's experiment, and let's continually make improvements.
Yeah, the spirit of Carol Dweck is alive and well. Carol wrote the book on a growth mindset. And basically, she's saying what you're saying. If you believe you can grow and learn, guess what? You'll grow and learn. This is not that complicated, but you've got to be open to that. Exactly. And what we've observed in all of our leadership work at Conant Leadership is that largely leaders, I'm going to use a different phrase, they lead by the seat of their pants. And that's not good enough. You have colleagues and people that you live and work with that are counting on you to lead in an enlightened way. And you can, if you listen to the evidence and you're open to learning. So this seat of the pants leadership that we have succumbed to and accepted politically, corporately, is just not good enough. We have to have higher standards, and we have to be enlightened with our learning. And then the other piece I would build on this is we have to be very intentional in our application to
Absolutely.
It. You're saying learning is great.
Yeah.
Now design your day and live that way, a little more that way than you would otherwise. All the learning is wonderful, but it demands application. Yeah. And then more learning.
And I'll be your hallelujah chorus on that one word that you mentioned, which I want to underscore and amplify, which is the word intentional. When you actually look at the behavior of leaders, the behavior of many of us, much of our behavior is not intentional. It is, we can call it some of it is seat of the pants. Some of it is based on default settings that might be right or might be wrong. Some of it is based on established habits and patterns of behavior, but it's not intentional. And when it comes to timing, daily timing, we are not intentional. We make our decisions about when to do things based on guesswork, based on intuition, based on seat of the pants conclusions. And that's the wrong way to do it. You have to do it with intention and evidence. And I think, Doug, one of the interesting things going on is that this is not only something happening in the world of work, in the world of leadership, this is happening everywhere in our society and culture. You and I talked at the top about baseball. Baseball decisions for a long time were made seat of the pants, intuition, and now more and more they're based on evidence. And those decisions on balance are better. They're not perfect, but let's make decisions based on evidence and let's continue to gather better evidence. And I think whether it's medicine or baseball or leadership or anything, we'll be better off.
Hallelujah, back to you. And one last point, and then I'm going to go on to the next question. I remember short point. I spent a lot of time with Stephen Covey when he was really hitting stride. And there was something he said to me that I will never forget. And I was in a highly reactive mode with my work at that time. I was just reacting to what was coming to me, seat of the pants, intuitive. And he said, Doug, between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. Between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. In that space is the power of choice. We all have the opportunity to choose our response to any and every stimulus. And he said, that is our responsibility to choose that response. To say we don't have a choice it's just wrong. We have choices, we have to make them. And if we want to make them with courage, we've got to get really well anchored with a foundation that's got a lot of evidence behind it so that we can be courageous and take a position that is more intentional and maybe against the norm. But in the fullness of time, we believe will be better for all of us. So I'm done with that. You had a specific, in the work, you write that we have woefully undervalued breaks, and I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on that, because I feel guilty. As soon as I take a break, I'm thinking, oh, I could have done this, I should have done that. And before I've even taken it, I'm back doing something else that is draining me. And I'd like to know what the implications that has for this new world of work, this notion of breaks.
Yeah, I mean, this is an example. I mean, where I changed my mind on something fairly significantly, at least in 2 dimensions. So when I initially started writing this book, I was going to write, I have a whiteboard right over there where I sort of map things out. And in the original incarnation of it, I was going to write maybe 1 or 2 book pages on breaks. And then I started looking at the evidence on breaks, and I was blown away that we have, one way I think about things is sort of almost like a pricing, like how do we price things in our world? Like what is overvalued and what is undervalued? And breaks, I thought, were completely undervalued. And the evidence is overwhelming. And it changed my view, because I had the same thing. This bizarre, distorted notion of moral virtue that came from powering through. Yeah. When in fact, and I had it 180 degrees wrong. I used to believe that amateurs took breaks and professionals didn't. And that is just the reverse is true. What the evidence tells us is that professionals take breaks, and it's the amateurs who don't take breaks. And in every realm, you see it big time, some incredible evidence in education that giving kids recess and giving kids breaks improves their learning. You see it in some really interesting research on athletes and musicians, that the most accomplished and best athletes and musicians actually are the ones who actually take more breaks than the ones who are less accomplished, because that they know is the secret to getting better. And so what we need to do is we need to think and just really reconceive things, that we have to think about breaks as part of our performance, not a deviation from our performance. Breaks as part of our performance, not a deviation from our performance. And that is hard when we're gripped by the legacy of both this puritanical thinking and by industrial age thinking, where in collective bargaining agreements, you have breaks are considered a quote unquote concession. And so we need to be intentional about breaks, and we know a lot about what kind of breaks are most restorative.
Okay. And I've got to tell you, my wife doesn't think I've retired, but I did retire from being a CEO a decade ago now. But I am seeing the power of breaks and the need for them as I'm aging. I just turned 70. And I've got to say, I am so much better at, if I pace myself as a CEO. Look, you're 24/7. Yeah. My God, 365 days a year for a decade. I was doing this with a 5-hour commute, 2.5 hours each way, and you're just going. And I'm learning, and if I can learn, anybody can learn this. I'm learning to do a better job of pacing myself. My wife would say I'm still doing too much, but I can't be more supportive of the notion of engineering breaks that are restorative in nature to you and in your work. I partner, my writing partner for my first book, Touch Points, which you, I think, wrote an endorsement for, and I appreciate that. She started engineering sort of breaks into her work. She had walking meetings where they not all meetings, but half of the meetings she was in, were one-on-one or two-on-one, and the three of you could walk the hall, have a better discussion, and actually get a break out of it. So what I would encourage everybody listening to do is to reimagine your work. And don't just think a break is, okay, now I'm going to put everything away and I'm going to go to the break room, figuratively. You can really re-engineer your work so that it's less draining and actually more fulfilling and more restorative. So
And again, we know how to do this. What we know about breaks from this rich body of evidence is some core principles, which is that something is better than nothing. So a short break is better than no break at all. We know that outside is better than inside. So if you can take a break, get outside. We know that moving is better than stationary. So if you take a break, being in motion is better than being sedentary. We know some very interesting evidence that social is better than solo, that breaks with other people are more restorative than breaks on our own. And that's true even for introverts. And finally, we know that fully detached is better than semi-detached. So a break has to be, I like walking meetings and I do those, but in my view, a break has to be a break.
Fair. Yeah.
And so we can take these principles and like if everybody listening to this dedicated themselves, let's say like for the rest of the week, okay, let's say Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take each afternoon, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, I'm going to take a 15-minute walk outside with someone I like, talking about something other than work and leaving my phone behind. That's it. Even that very small practice is powerful. And it is actually, in a way, it's proof of that you are a professional. You're not a slacker. That act is proof that you're a pro.
Yeah. Wow. When I became a CEO, I realized my life was getting out of control. So I had to change my sleep patterns because I'm not one of the 20%, I'm one of the 80%. And I said, I got to get up earlier, but I've got to get my sleep. So I've got to go to bed earlier. I started getting up before the sunrise. I would sit in my garden with a cup of coffee, imagine my day and all that was going on with it. I would then go in and put on as the sun came up, I was doing that. And then I would go and put on my suit of armor, which was my suit. And I would be in a car for 2 hours going to the office. And I found ways to take breaks in there and to do some very meaningful work because I had no distractions. And so I had to reimagine my day in order to function in that job, given the criterias and the constraints I dealt with. I believe if you can do it as a CEO, which I have doctor friends that have as demanding a profession, but anybody can do this. Anybody can reimagine their day, can find that 15 minutes, and they can transform their energy level. So I'm with you. I got to ask you one more question, and then unfortunately we've got to let somebody else talk other than you and me. In the book, you write about the fresh start effect, and I love that idea. Could you describe what it is and how it applies in this post-pandemic workplace?
Yeah, this is some work done by some research done by some researchers at Penn, or two of them are still at Penn, Katie Milkman and Jason Reese, and one of them is a researcher named Heng-Chen Dai, who's now at UCLA. And what they were looking at is they're studying a broader category of what are called temporal landmarks. There are certain days that stick out on the calendar the way that physical landmarks stick out in space. And they have a similar effect, these temporal landmarks. They get us to slow down, assess. And in particular, there are these certain kinds of temporal landmarks that they found that triggered behavior change, or at least promoted behavior change. So things like And what they found, looking at some really, really interesting inventive data, is that people are much more likely to begin a program of behavior change, whether it's going to the gym, going on a diet, new productivity program, on a Monday rather than on a Thursday, on the first of the month rather than on the 13th of the month, on the first day of fall rather than 6 days into fall, on the day after their birthday rather than 6 days before their birthday. That there were certain dates in the calendar that if we were aware of them, they gave us a better fighting chance to change. And what happens, the mechanism I think is interesting, at least as they describe it, is that at these dates, these fresh start dates, we sort of open up a fresh ledger on ourselves. We say, old me didn't exercise, but new me reborn with a fresh ledger on this Monday, on the October 1, on the first day of the semester if you're a student, is going to change. And what it shows is that we're actually more likely to start behavior change and actually to continue behavior change on some dates rather than others. And what I think is happening more slowly than any of us would want is that we have this, at some level, this international fresh start day coming up, where at some point we're going to get past this pandemic and we're going to have this, international reboot. And I think it's really important for us to think about that and take advantage of that. It's almost unprecedented, a fresh start of that magnitude, both in terms of what we endured beforehand and also how international it is. And so for the leaders out there who are in, as you know, Doug, in the business of behavior change, pick the dates you start behavior change carefully, because you're going to have better odds on some days versus others.
Yeah, that's great. I remember going to college thinking that was a fresh start date. I can reinvent myself. I can be and I was motivated, I carried that into my practice as a CEO. I have whenever I hire someone working for me, I had a first hour, first day meeting, first hour, first day. And I rather boldly talked about kind of who I was, my agenda. It was an orientation to working with me, and nobody had ever quite seen anything like it before. But I remember working for like 3 months, wondering what the boss really wanted and feeling like I was on eggshells and not hitting stride for a long time as I was trying to figure it out. Well, my approach was first hour, first day, when we're both open to learning, let's talk about it.
Fantastic.
So I launched this thing and people's heads would be spinning, but then I would invite them to come back to me with this fresh start mindset. I didn't use those words, and say, you come back to me and share with me all you're comfortable sharing with me. And then let's get after this. Let's take advantage of this moment where we're both starting anew and we can start a new chapter together. And I didn't know the science behind it, but it certainly was helpful to me with individuals and also with teams and organizations. So just further testimony to that. I've got to stop talking and we have to turn it over to Amy, and she's going to start surfing questions. And please direct them all to Dan. I'll chime in once in a while, but let's milk Dan for all we can get here.
Sounds good. We have quite a few questions, so let's jump right in. We have one here from Michelle. Since 80% of people reach their peaks early in the day, how do you foster understanding/support for the 20% of us that don't work well with the typical 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. schedule?
Great question. It sounds like it's a question from Michelle the Owl. It is. This is a great. I like to think of this as a great opportunity for leadership. And we have all kinds of assessments. Leaders have all kinds of assessments, some of which are bogus. So we want to know like who's an introvert, who's an extrovert. We don't want to know what their Myers-Briggs profile is, their DISC profile, or their blah, 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 blah. And I'm okay on those. But I think that we should have a handle on people's chronotypes, because if you have a team of owls, if you have a lot of people in your owls, don't make them go to an 8 a.m. staff meeting. They're not going to contribute much. They're not going to be happy, and they're going to sour on the job. And we have to recognize that, Doug, I mean, this is like a fundamental principle of leadership. You should treat everybody well, but that doesn't mean you should treat everybody the same. And so I think we got to give much greater autonomy and freedom to these to the evening chronotypes and say, listen, if you are a software engineer or if you're a graphic designer or whatever, and there isn't any virtue in being in the office at 8 o'clock in the morning. The virtue is doing great work. And we got to give people much more sovereignty and control over all the aspects of their work and allow them to do great work. And one way to help the Michelles of the world do great work is to stop making them come to 8 a.m. staff meetings and saying, hey, you want to work at 9 p.m.? That's cool. All we care about, Michelle, is you do great work. And I, as your leader, I'm here to support you in your capacity to do great work.
Yeah. This is a tough one. I'm just going to build on this because Michelle, look, I've had 28 bosses in my life.
Oh my!
Not counting my wife, and they each had a boss. Interestingly, that's 56 bosses, and 3 of them were women. 53 of them were men, and 3 of them were good out of all 56. So I didn't have a lot of understanding bosses who were interested in knowing how I worked or how I was wired. And what I'd like to encourage you to do is get to a place where you can have courageous conversations with the people you work with and the people you work for, where you can commit full up. Hey, I'm in it. I'll deliver. I want to perform. I love being here, but I've got to tell you, this is how I work best. And if you need me if you want all hands on deck for an 8 o'clock meeting, if I need to be there, I'll be there.
Absolutely.
But I'm telling you, I'll do my best work at 11:30. I have a middle son who is a genius at 11:30. He's a lot less of a genius at 8 a.m. And so I know what we're talking about here. But the key is to have courageous conversations around it where you're fully committed to the work, because the boss needs you to be committed to performance and to work. But you'd be amazed if you have that conversation, how you can start to gently restructure your day. That being said, that might have worked with half my bosses that weren't great. There's another half that it wouldn't. Ultimately, you've got to find a place to plant yourself that's going to honor who you are.
True.
And if it doesn't work there, sadly, it may be their loss, but you need to find a place where you can plant yourself and where you can bloom.
Let me offer one other very specific practice on this that I've seen emerging, which I actually kind of like. And Doug, you sort of did almost like a beta or even alpha version of it in your description of as a CEO. Is that what I've seen people do is essentially writing a user manual for themselves at work. So you write a user manual for yourself and you say these things explicitly. Here's how I like to work. Here's how I like to communicate. And I've done that in a couple of instances, and it's really useful because we all have these like idiosyncrasies. I'll give you one of mine is that like I cannot stand getting a document that doesn't have page numbers, because inevitably I'll print it out and I'll drop it and then I won't know where the page numbers are. All right. Forgive me, Sudhir, the Larry Page and Sergey Brin and Sudhir Pichai, but I really don't like Google Docs. So I'd much rather have an attachment and even these like idiosyncratic things, and it's like, and once people know that, they don't really care one way or another. It's like, okay, Dan, I'll paginate it for you. Not that big of a deal. You're going to be less cranky. And then if someone says to me, listen, like, I don't like getting emails on the weekend. I will do all my work, but I'm busy on the weekend. And so don't send me emails on the weekend. I'm like, okay, cool. I'll send it to you on Monday morning, or I'll do something like, put a little symbol on it saying reply on Monday, even if I send it over the weekend. And those small kinds of things that require, I think, as Doug says, an act of courage, I think people are fairly receptive to it. So.
Yeah. And the key is if you're in the workplace and you're grinding away, that your boss knows you are totally committed to delivering high performance. then it's amazing the flexibility you can earn over time. So,
Absolutely. And that's exactly right. This is not an excuse for slacking or for, you
Right.
know, this is an excuse for, this is a way to do better work. If you're not committed, I don't care what time of day you work. I don't want you working with me. But if you are committed, I want to make sure, because everything we know about human performance suggests that the more ownership you have over what you do, how you do it, when you do it, where you do it, the more likely you're going to be engaged, the more likely you're going to deliver great work. And we shouldn't mistake showing up with commitment. There are plenty of people who are showing up at that 8 o'clock staff meeting and aren't really contributing. And so let's just, let's honor genuine commitment and genuine achievement, and then allow people greater freedom to make their way there.
Great. Amy,
Here,
let's
here.
next question.
Next, we have a question from Sarah. Sarah says, this is a great summary of how we can divide our time better, but what about those of us who still believe in work-life balance? Where do we schedule the life balance piece into our days? Can or should life be scheduled into our day, or is that unrealistic? Pandemic experiences have probably taught us something new about this.
Great question. And I think that the answer is, I'll tell you what, I think there's some evidence on this, and I can also speak from my own experience. I think the answer is yes, that I think that you should be intentional about your work and your family life. One practice that's out there that I think it can be effective if you're working on your own, if you're working is actually to have a stop time for your work day. If you're working, if you're working remotely or working, and say, I'm done working at 6:30 or whatever time it is. Because what I've seen is that people, if you say, I'm never done working, things will bleed into that 8 o'clock period, 9 o'clock period, 10:30 period. And so if you have a stop time, you actually will end up getting stuff done. What I believe in this work-life balance is that there should be some integration, but there should also be a soft separation. And here's what I mean by that. Now, I'm fortunate in that my home office is actually the garage behind my house. So I actually commute to work. I'll show you. I commute, you can sort of see my house over there. Well, sort of. I commute 22 steps from the house to this little garage office, all right? So I work at home, but there's a soft separation there. One of the things is I rarely will I'm talking to you on this laptop. I rarely will take my laptop inside the house because I want that kind of soft separation. So if you're working, let's say you're working in a small apartment, you might not even have another room, dedicate a certain spot, and that's your work spot. And so I do think that that being intentional about how you integrate it, but also keeping some kind of soft separation seems to be the best solution. And it's not a one size fits all solution. It's a your size fits you solution. So with Sarah, I would experiment with ways to be intentional about scheduling that time, and be intentional also about your space, because your space and your presence has a big role in how you think about what you're doing.
Yeah, I would build on it just as a practitioner. When I spoke earlier about waking up earlier in order to get my job done and have energy, I would stay home and I would drive at least, I was intentional with my family life. I would drive at least one of my children to school every day before I sat in the car forever and worked from the car. I knew that nights in my line of work were just forget about it.
Yeah.
I didn't know where I was going to be or what I was going to be doing. I developed other little practices that would nest in my cockamamie day. I'm just going to give you some examples, Sarah. For Christmas, I stopped giving presents. I wrote something for each of my children that was pretty meaningful to me, and I would give them to them for Christmas, and it was reflective on the year and my relationship with them. Now, they probably got those for about 20 years, and at least one of them probably has no copy of any of them. But they were moments where I was marking our relationship and where we were taking it to almost a sacred place, if you will. I was trying to carve out moments like that, make the most of moments in a way that would nest in my day. I would work on writing these things most of in my free time, whatever that was, in the car in December, and it would lead up to Christmas. So look at your day, look at your cockamamie life, look for opportunities to engineer in meaningful moments, what we call touch points in my first book, where you can strengthen your relationships in a way that nests in what is always going to be a cockamamie life. And whether it's soft separation and having the office and the home gently separated, or whether it's carving out meal times or whatever, you can find a way to do this and do it and think small. Think small. James Cleary has this notion of atomic habits. Get these small habits that make big differences at connecting with your family. There's so much writing on this notion of habits. Robert Maurer at UCLA, James Cleary, then somebody at Stanford, BJ
Fogg.
Yeah. And
Wendy Wood has done a lot of this research.
Yeah. There's a lot you can do in small increments if you're intentional about it, as we talked about earlier. So just more thought. Amy, let's go to another.
Great, thank you both.
Question.
We have a question here from Marcia. What's the best time specifically to listen to webinars and podcasts, the time for peak listening skills?
Interesting question. I'm not sure. I don't think there's a definitive answer to that. One of the closest thing that I can, depends on the closest analog to that I can see is there is some research showing that people get more out of therapy in the morning than they do later in the day. And it could just simply be about mental alertness, and vigilance and paying attention and whatnot. And there's some interesting research. So and there's some interesting research on kids, where showing elementary school students, a pretty powerful piece of research from Devin Pope, looking at the university. He's at Chicago, University of Chicago, but he looked at the LA Unified School District, showing that kids who had math in the morning learned more math and scored higher on statewide standardized test scores than kids who had math in the afternoon. So on balance, there might be a slight advantage to the morning, but beyond, but I would, I think that it's really a question of being intentional about it. Like not intentional, being aware. So, I would say, Marcia, listen to some podcasts and make a little note about how you felt during it, how much learning you felt you had, and see if you see a pattern there. Maybe for you, it's a walk in the afternoon with a podcast. Maybe for you, it's first thing in the morning, but pay attention to your own reactions and go from there. Again, I keep coming back to this idea that we have to experiment, that we all have to start thinking like scientists. Scientists have hypotheses, they test the hypotheses, they refine their hypotheses and their understanding based on the results of those experiments. That's what we all should be doing.
I had a fellow that worked for me who was running a sales meeting once, and he put up on the slide 10 little lines. And he said he said to the group, there are 10 two-letter words that are going to define your growth as a performer and a leader. 10 two-letter words. And we're all sitting there thinking, God, I wonder what the 10 two-letter words are. And the 10 two-letter words are, if it is to be, it is up to me. And you need to be your own scientist. You need to evaluate your own life. Dan Pink is brilliant, but he can't do that for you. He's stirring the pot. He's challenging you to be your own scientist and do your own experiments and learn from them. And you can and you will. I'm going to do one other build on what Dan said. Dan, you've done a lot of podcasts, as have I. And when I get feedback from podcasts, I often, the people that are writing in who have clearly gotten into it are saying, I was on my morning walk. I was driving into the office.
Mm-hmm.
I was on my late afternoon run. It seems like those kind of activities, and this is just anecdotal, seem to be where people are most engaged in the podcasts, where they're I don't know how to describe it, but that's where anecdotally that's what I hear. So okay.
Doug, when do you listen to podcasts and things like that?
I listen to them when I used to when I was traveling, and then I would listen to them. I'm a very early riser. It started, 4 o'clock kind of in the morning, 4 to 5. But I listen to them early in the morning with my cup of coffee, out in the garden. Sort of, that's where I gather myself. I do about two or maybe 2 a week now that I listen to, but that's when I do it. Amy, another question?
Yes, we have a few variations of this question. So I'm going to ask Nicole's, because it's a good summation of the question about time zones. So Nicole asks, how do we manage this in a global workforce where employees sit in vastly different time zones?
Another really great question. So first of all, it's very hard to do this perfectly. And it's actually really important. We're still dealing with brains that evolved in a very different time. Remember, our brains evolved in a moment when there were not time zones, because there were not hours, because it was impossible to talk to anybody who was outside of the sound of your voice. So that's the brains that we have. So the idea of talking to people across time zones is something that our brains are grinding that out. It's not what we're equipped for. However, I think that there are two ways to address it. One of them is this. I look at, especially conference calls, Zoom meetings, and things like that, as a way to look at it is this, as a bundle of tasks to be done, questions to be answered, or something like that. Think of it as a bundle of tasks and questions. And I think what you have to ask when you have a Zoom meeting or a conference call or whatever is, can any of those things in that bundle be done asynchronously? And I think in almost all cases, many of those things can be done asynchronously. And so you're better off doing those things asynchronously and leaving what has to be done synchronously for the things that can only be done synchronously. Example would be something like brainstorming. There's some pretty good evidence that people are just as good at generating ideas on their own as they are with other people. They're better evaluating them with other people. So maybe if you're going to have a brainstorming session across time zones, have people generate the ideas on their own asynchronously, contribute them, and then use the synchronous time, which will therefore be less time, to actually debate and talk about the ideas. So that's one thing. Figure out what's asynchronous and move it and allow people to do that on their own. And that'll help a little bit. And the other one is actually just about fairness, which is spreading the pain. So if you have a global team, make sure the person in Australia isn't always the one getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do a conference call, or the person in Washington, D.C. isn't in his darkened office in his garage on a conference call at 12:30 p.m. Spread it out a little bit.
A couple things. I remember 1,000 years ago when I was at Campbell as CEO, I was in a meeting. I was at IBM with Sam Palmisano, who was the CEO who followed Lou Gerstner. And Sam, and I don't know the term because I'm a Neanderthal with technology, but Sam had just done this brainstorming exercise with all IBM employees over 24 hours. And I don't remember what it was called, but they were all weighing in on the creation of a value system for the new IBM. And he had it all printed out, and he had piles of paper in his office, and he said it was amazing to him, by spreading it out and giving people an opportunity to weigh in when it worked for them. His observation was that the quality of the input was profoundly better. Again, this is anecdotal.
Yeah.
And at the time, this would have been in the early 2000s. there was not a lot of this work going on. It was like a leading edge thing. And it helped, it was a signature practice they started to develop to get all of IBM more engaged in the direction of the enterprise. So this notion of brainstorming and idea generation, anything that is content related, idea related, I would encourage you to make it asynchronous and allow it to come in, create a window, 24 hours, and then in our next meeting, we'll talk about it when we have our time together. The only other thing is what I've noticed with the Zoom calls, people are endeavoring for these team meetings across time zones, they're endeavoring to make these meetings more fun. And there is nothing wrong with that. In fact, you need to, because some people are up in the middle of the night and some people are wide awake and ready to go. And the leaders that are getting the most traction are making these meetings worth attending and are trying to inject some learning, some humor, some fun into it. There's nothing wrong with having fun. We're in this business for performance, but performance does not, it can be fun. And so I encourage you to inject some opportunities for fun, for learning, for personal growth into these meetings that make the pain a little easier to bear. So that's just practices. Amy, another one?
Thank you both. We have a question here from Kwaja. Which tip worked or works most in infusing trust in a remote environment? Is it autonomy or is it something else?
Oh, it's an interesting question, Kwaja. I'm not sure. My hunch would be that trust is so complex and deep that there isn't a single move that fosters it, that it's really about a constellation of behaviors that foster it. And so, but I think that autonomy becomes a huge part of trust. That is, I think that the arrows point both directions. That if you give people, if you have trust, you give people autonomy. If you give people autonomy, they prove that they can take it, that fosters trust. But I also think I would go back to purpose too. You can have trust in people if everybody's aligned on the same purpose. But trust it's I think there are a lot of ingredients. I think some of it also is the courageous conversations. I think some of it is your capacity as a leader to tell the truth. I think some of it is your willingness to delegate, your willingness to tolerate some degree of failure in the service of something bold and interesting. So it's a whole constellation of things. And I'm not sure we know that much about trust, but except that it's deeply important and very, very hard to foster and unbelievably easy to destroy.
Amen. And the constellation comment, I think, is really at the heart of it. The time to build trust is before you need it.
Yeah.
So all these leaders and aspiring leaders out there, the time to build trust is before you need it with all of your teammates. And the way I think about building trust is about competence. You have to know what you're doing, and character, you have to do what you say you're going to do. I don't want to make it overly simplistic, but if you display sensitivity to others and you're competent in the dispensation of your duties and you do what you say you're going to do, in the fullness of time, you will build trust.
Right.
To Dan's point, one misstep will undermine all of that trust. That's why I think the Stephen Covey concept of the emotional bank account is a good one, in that you want to think of this trust building as a bank account. You want to be so much in the black
exactly
that when you screw up, and you will, and you'll have a major screw up.
Exactly.
When you take that big withdrawal, you're still in the black, because they're going to say, oh, I know Dan screwed up or Doug screwed up, but he's been so reliable over time. I'm going to give him a pass on this one. But then you got to go back to building that bank account. But this trust thing is got to be a proactive leadership practice, not a reactive one.
Yeah, can I pick up on one phrase you used, Doug, because I think it's extremely important. It's the third time you've used it in this conversation. And that phrase is in the fullness of time.
Oh, yeah.
In the fullness of time. And that I think is also really central. And again, going back to my overly economic way of thinking about things, what's value, what's undervalued, what's overvalued. I think as we were talking about before, I think at some level we've overvalued synchronous work and undervalued asynchronous work a little bit.
Mhm.
But I think what we've also seen is we have overvalued the idea of like we've overvalued this kind of move fast and break things approach, and we've undervalued patience in the long game. And I've become more convinced over and over again that patience, like the way we're valuing these things is off, and like patience, playing the long game, and doing the right things in the fullness of time will pay off is the way to go. And it's really hard. I mean, you were a public company CEO, so you had all these short-term pressures. We all have people yelling at us all day long, short-term pressures. But I think if we say fullness of time, patience, as difficult it is to do on a daily basis, that's the way to roll.
I wish I'd come up with the line. I didn't, but someone once said that, Doug, slow is fast and fast is slow.
Yeah.
And in this leadership game right now, the world is trying to speed you up. And I'm telling you, you probably need to slow down and be more thoughtful, not go faster and try and keep up. Because guess what? It's going to go faster. You're never going to keep up. There's too much. So you need to be slow and thoughtful, not too slow, but you need to slow down a little bit and be thoughtful. And by the way, I learned as a CEO, you can play the long game. You also have to be competitive in the short game. We talk about being a leadership time traveler. We talk about as a leader, look, you got to perform on 3 levels. You have to remember and honor the past and learn from it. You have to deliver in the present, and you have to be creating a more prosperous future all at the same time.
Right.
You can't do that like that.
Yeah.
You have to be slow and thoughtful, experiment, be your own personal scientist, and learn. Amy, we've got time for one more for Dan, and then I think we've got to let everybody get back to work. This has been your break. I hope you're enjoying it.
I don't know if, let's see, what is your opinion? We have one that will be a lightning round, let's call it.
Okay.
So make it fast. What is your opinion on multitasking? And how does that rub up against the need to be more mindful in our lives, personal and professional?
Human beings can't 99 out of 100 human beings cannot multitask. What they're doing instead is they're switching between tasks and doing each task poorly. Stop multitasking.
Hear, hear.
Amen.
Doug, anything to add?
Yeah, you should have told me it was a lightning round from the beginning, because I would have, like I'm very obedient. So
No, well,
that was very succinct.
Yeah, and very right. I kidded. We all kid ourselves about our ability to do more than we can do, and we like the optics of that, especially when we have responsibilities and people working for us. We like everybody to think that we've got this capacity to do more than we can really do. And that I would go all the way back to what Dan said at the very beginning about the importance of humility here. Don't fool yourself or try and fool others that you can do more, better, faster. Do what works for you in a way that honors the needs around you. But do what works for you, move at your pace, and find a way to make that work with others.
Great.
Anyway.
Thank you both. Dan, do you have any final comments before Doug closes us out? Is there anything we didn't ask you that you'd like people to know?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, to me, if I were to recapitulate what I would, let's go back. I mean, I don't know if it's useful, but let's go back to like what we overvalue and what we undervalued. And I think what we overvalue is moving and thinking fast, moving fast and thinking fast, which is good sometimes, but as Daniel Kahneman told us in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, thinking slow actually produces better results in many cases. I think at some level we have overvalued kind of moonshots, gigantic, enormous goals, and we've totally undervalued small wins. Small wins is how stuff happens. Small wins cascade to small wins. And as we've talked about a lot, I think that we've overvalued, or at least haven't scrutinized intuitive seat of the pants judgments, and undervalued the power of intention.
Well, Dan, there's a reason he's so highly regarded. That's a wonderful summary. Dan, thank you. You're a real point of light in a challenging world.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
You inspire me to. I know I can do better, and I get ideas from you that lead me to thinking differently and constantly believing, whether it happens or not, I don't know, that I can lift my game. And so we thank you for that. And we thank all of our guests for joining us today. We know you have lots of demands on your time. We are honored that you came to join us. I want to encourage you to follow up with Dan Pink. You can track him on Twitter, on Facebook. He's got his own website as well, which is up here on the screen. Buy his book, Drive. I can sell you on that one. And the new one is even more promising and very relevant to the work we're doing today. So I encourage you to lean into learning. And if you lean into learning, you'll be in the pink. So on that note, God, that was good. On that note, I'm going to sign off. Tomorrow we have Hubert Joly, an amazing fellow. And even though he's from France, we like him anyway. And he's going to be a terrific guest talking about a new leadership paradigm through his eyes that he brought to life at Best Buy. So Amy, I'll turn it over to you and you can close us out.
Great. Thank you, Doug. Thank you again so much to Dan Pink for sharing your time and insights with us today. Please do, I just want to reiterate to follow Dan Pink on social media and go to his website, which Mara should have dropped in the chat. You can buy all of his best-selling books there. Next, I do just want to tell you about some exciting ways to engage with Conant Leadership's suite of training and content this year, this fall. First, join us for tomorrow's summit. Doug mentioned that. We have Hubert Joly, former CEO of Best Buy. Next, our signature leadership development program, the Blueprint Bootcamp by Conant Leadership, is a 2-day leadership intensive. It's offering elite level, highly interactive training with Doug and a community, a small group community of your leadership peers. And that's followed by personal mentorship opportunities with Doug. Due to COVID-19, we pivoted our in-person programming to an all virtual format at a competitive discounted rate last year. And we are running one more program at that rate this year on November 3rd and 5th. And enrollment closes for that program on Monday, October 4th, this coming Monday. We do also have 2 programs next year in May and October, which are open for enrollment. If you'd like to explore this premium tier of transformational leadership development, you can apply today at conantleadership.com/bootcamp or reach out to our wonderful Conant Leadership Chief of Staff, Mara Katsikis, at mara@conantleadership.com. We are offering a special limited time coupon code only for summit attendees and only for this week. You can use the code SUMMIT500 at checkout to get $500 off the registration price of our boot camp. The code is good for any of our programs, but it does expire on Sunday at midnight. Finally, you can always engage with our suite of free leadership resources at conantleadership.com or find us at Doug Conant on Twitter and LinkedIn. Keep an eye on our social media for timely leadership insights and updates about all of our upcoming virtual events, town halls, and learning opportunities. We do virtual learning. They're usually free opportunities just like this one pretty frequently. So that's what we have on deck. If we weren't able to get to your question today, please know we are always looking to serve leaders better, and we use these questions to inform our content and leadership development programming. That said, if you have any follow-up inquiries, please reach out to us via email again at mara@conantleadership.com. Thank you again to Doug and Dan Pink, and we hope to see you tomorrow for our session with Hubert Joly. Take care.